I'm Jeans, and today I'm going to show you how to make a macrame coaster. So some things you need to get started: a pair of scissors, a comb, and a little piece of cork or something else that you can push pins into. And that's what I use to affix my piece onto while I'm working on it. And of course, you're going to need some rope or some string. Here I'm using some seafoam green bamboo string from Naroma Studio. That's where I get most of my macrame supplies from. They're a warehouse, I believe in New Jersey, that sells all kinds of beautiful rope and string and a lot of recycled materials as well. And so you can see here that I'm prepping my materials. I'm cutting the rope that I need. And to get started, you're going to need one really long piece of rope. And by really long, I mean like about a little more than an arm's distance. So I take the rope in one hand and I spread my arms all the way across. And that's about how much you need. You could do a little more than that. And that'll be your center core piece of rope. And then all these other pieces I'm cutting right here are our working ropes. And you need 5 to get started. You will affix 5 ropes to that inner core rope. And I'll show you what I mean by that in a moment. But I usually cut a bunch of rope or string in varying sizes because when you make a coaster, it's a spiral shape. And when you're starting out in the center, those pieces of rope that you're starting out with are going to be making a knot about 4, 5, 6 times, so you need more of it. And as you're getting towards the ends, you do need to keep adding more rope because it is a spiral. Each layer is getting bigger and bigger. It's like kind of expanding exponentially out, so you need to keep adding to it. So I keep cutting rope in a sort of like descending size as I go. You can see I've kind of lined them up on the desk, folded in half according to size. So it's really hard to give you an exact number of rope you need. I actually realized I cut too much rope by the time I finished this. So here I am grabbing my long inner rope, and so you want to fold the rope in half, moving everything out of the way, but it's not really in half, it's more like in a third. So you fold it, and one end is 1/3 and the other end is 2/3. So the long end is going to be the core that you're tying all these knots around. And the other end, it becomes another working end. So I'm going to take 5 long ropes, you fold them in half, and you tie a lark's head knot onto your long working rope. So you can see that I'm doing that there. It's a little hard to see what I'm doing. Aha, I zoomed in so you can see the lark's head knot a little bit better. So I'm going to do another one. Bring the 2 ends together, slide your hand all the way to the bite end. That's the loop. You slide the bite under what you're attaching it to. As you can see there. You take the bite and fold it over and pull the working ends through the bite. And then you just pull to tighten. So we're going to do that 3 more times. The lark's head knot is the most common way of attaching cords or ropes to a dowel or another piece of rope or anything else that you might be attaching something to. It's really common. You might have used it before, just kind of in your everyday life. I like to give names to the knots so I can remember what they are. So remember this one, lark's head knot. It's pretty simple. When you're attaching it, you just want to make sure that you're not crossing your inner ropes. So you want them to stay with the longer piece at the top and the shorter piece at the bottom. And sometimes they get a little mixed up, so you just want to be careful of that. So once all 5 of your ropes are attached using lark's head knots, you're going to take the longer end, your inner core thread that you're going to be wrapping all of your knots around, and you're going to loop it through that little loop on the end. So slide it in there and pull it all the way through until you create a little ring of your lark's head knots. So pull it tight, and I usually adjust all of the lark's head knots. I pull on them a little, make sure they're nice and tight, and I slide them all towards the loop end then. So we have a nice compact little circle. So once you do that, you pull on that long piece again to really secure it. And then you take your piece of cork or whatever else you have to pin your coaster to. I put it right in the center, put a couple sewing pins right in the middle of it so it stays. And you're ready to get started. So that's the prep work. Oh, I can't pick that up. That's the prep work for making a coaster. Sometimes I prep a couple of them, and then I'm just ready to make them on the go. So here's where we get to the fun part where we start spiraling around. And the knot that we're going to be using is called a clove hitch knot. So the clove hitch knot is a very commonly used knot in wall hangings and other kind of macrame art that you might see. It's usually in a straight line or a vertical, but in a coaster, it's happening in a spiral. And I really love coasters for their spiral quality. I find it very meditative when I'm working on them. So here's what you're going to do. You're going to take your long inner rope, and I bring it over towards the right. I suppose you can do your spiral in the other direction, but this is how I do it. I hold it on the right. I take my working rope and I bring it over and then through its loop that it makes itself and just pull on that. You want to hold the string on your right hand kind of close to the circle. And then you just do that again. You make a loop, bring the rope through it, and pull. And that is one clove hitch knot. So each clove hitch knot kind of has 2 parts to it. It's the same thing twice with the same piece of rope. So you're going to repeat the clove hitch knot over and over again. That's the only knot other than the lark's head knot that we do in a macrame coaster. So I sped the video up a little bit so you can see what that looks like in fast motion. You can pause it and just keep tying until you get to the point where there's a gap between where your last knot is and your next working rope is. And I'll show you what to do in a moment when that happens. So I like to use a piece of white rope for my inner core rope. And what that does is the one working end that you have ends up making a little white kind of line in your piece. And I just like that little detail. You're welcome to use the same color rope on the inside of your macrame piece. But that's a stylistic choice that I make. And then whenever I get to that part where the white line is, if I need to add another piece of rope, I'll choose, do I want to add more white and make it more of like a big chunk, like a slice of it? Or do I want to keep adding the color that I'm using? So you can see here, I've already added a couple pieces of white to that portion. So it's making this kind of white streak going through it. Again, just a stylistic choice. You can kind of do whatever you like. And now we are getting just up to a part where I'm going to have to add another piece of rope. I sped up before, so I didn't really show those parts, but here we are. I'm taking a medium length piece, not the longest, not the shortest. I fold it in half, another lark's head knot. So you make a loop, bring it over, and bring the ropes through and move it over to the edge. And then you just keep continuing on. I think I mentioned this earlier, but when you're making a spiral, each layer as you're going around is getting wider. The outermost layer is much wider than the inner one, so you're going to need more ropes to cover that surface area with your knots. And it's really interesting because a lark's head knot, when you attach it onto the string, looks really similar in kind of the bigger picture to the clove hitch knot. So you can't really tell where you've added a piece and where the knots are. It just kind of all seamlessly blends together. This is a very repetitive project. You're going to just be doing this over and over again until it gets to a length that you like. Whenever you feel like there's a gap between your last knot and your next piece of string, you just add another piece with a lark's head knot, and on and on and on. So I've sped up the rest of the video where I'm tying the clove hitch knots around and around, and I've also cut out a little bit so you can kind of follow along, but not sit here for an hour. But even still, it's pretty long to sit here and watch the whole thing. It's pretty satisfying, but if you want to skip ahead to the next part or pause the video while you work on your clove hitch knots, feel free to do that. You can skip ahead to the part where I start trimming it if you'd like. So here's the fun part where you cut all of your excess ropes and start trimming the piece. So I just take my scissors and I cut about a 1/2 inch to 1 inch away from the edge. And sometimes it's easier to just pick the whole thing up and let the pieces of rope dangle. They kind of fall a little bit better that way, and it's easier to cut. And it's really important to have a sharp pair of scissors. Mine are kind of getting dull. I need to sharpen them soon. There's all of my excess scrap. I actually save all of my scrap pieces for weaving projects, or I kind of have this idea that if I ever sew again, I might sew some pillows and use my scraps as the stuffing, but I haven't gotten there yet. But anyway, what you're going to do next is take your comb and start combing out the fringe. And this part takes a little while. It's very relaxing and fun. I love the noise it makes. So I have it on my wooden desk. It might make a different noise, I guess, depending on what surface you're using. Some nice macrame ASMR. And then I go in with a smaller, finer tooth comb. And I just use regular combs. That's a comb for your hair. That's a comb for like the edges of a wig. So I just go to like a beauty supply store and I got these combs. Wouldn't suggest using the same comb that you use in your hair on your macrame piece, just because like it's not sanitary if you're giving it to anybody else or selling it. But yeah, I use a finer tooth comb. Then I flip it around on the other side, and I just kind of get if any threads are kind of crossed or twisted there still, I brush them out. And just be careful not to brush those last knots on the outer ring of your coaster, especially if you had to add any rope at the end on that last piece of the spiral using a lark's head knot. It might come undone if you brush it too vigorously and you you snag the loop. So just be careful of that. So then I go ahead and I start trimming the fringe to make it even now that I brushed it out. And I use these little trimming scissors. I don't know what they're actually called, if there's like a specific name for them, but they're usually nice and sharp and they give you a nice precise trim. Once again, mine are not that sharp right now. I need to sharpen them. So my fringe might not be absolutely perfect, but trimming the fringe is the part of this piece where if you are a bit of a perfectionist, it might be really frustrating. I believe that you're never going to get absolutely perfect fringe. There's always going to be, if you keep looking, you're going to find another piece that's out of place. You're going to find another piece that's a little longer than the others, and you're going to be trimming forever and ever until you don't have any fringe. So at a certain point, you just have to tell yourself, this is good enough. And it usually is. So I definitely struggle with that, but I just have to decide when it's done. So we are just about coming to the end. I'm going to finish trimming up a little bit here. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope that you learned something, and I hope that you feel inspired to start maybe your first macrame project or just a new project, a macrame coaster. And if you are interested in learning more macrame and doing more macrame tutorials, please follow my Instagram at JeansGallo, JeansGallo. You can also join my Patreon, where I post these videos before the public gets to see them. And I will also be adding a level where I will send you the supplies for the project of the month. So that will be starting next month in February. So stay tuned for that. Thanks so much.